It is an absolutely perfect day outside. The birds are chirping, the bees are buzzing. I can hear the rush of the river down by the mill. And I'm so excited to show you guys the garden because we just got a bunch of rain. A lot of things have grown, and I've transplanted a lot of plants into the garden. So things are starting to actually really look like they're growing, which is awesome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rachel. Welcome to Auxhart Gardening. I do garden tours every single week, and I do that year round with the intention of showing you guys not just this exciting summer season where everything looks beautiful, but also showing you guys the reality of a garden throughout the entire year. I like to show you guys all of the things that get bug bitten, the things that just die. I like to talk about how I'm working on solving those mistakes, as well as being excited and showing you guys all of the really cool things that are happening in the garden. And if you take a look at the rest of my channel, you're going to find a lot of videos about the science of why things work in the garden. I've talked about things like how nitrogen fixing works, why pH is really important for your soil, and I really like to dive deeper into the why of things are happening, because I think that that makes it easier to decide how to do things the best in your garden and how to solve problems, because knowing why things are happening in the first place just sets you up with this whole set of knowledge that is a good baseline for solving problems and making decisions, as opposed to trying to listen to people who tell you, do this thing. Why? Because it works, or because it's best practice, or because it's the way we've always done it. I don't really settle for that. I want to know this is the reason, maybe even at a molecular level, why this thing is happening and why this thing works to help solve this problem. I try to always go in the same order so that everybody understands where things are. We're starting with the tomato trellis over here, and I recently transplanted out my lemongrass. I got this from the botanical garden sale. I wasn't really planning on having any, but I've cooked with it a few times, and it's kind of a pain to drive all the way out to the Asian market to get just lemongrass. So I saw it and I was like, might as well get some. It's looking a little rough. I left it outside when it was really just a little bit too cold before I transplanted it, so it's not exactly happy with me, but you can see the new growth coming in here is looking really green and happy, and that's all I need to know that the plant is going to recover and be okay. So underneath my tomato trellis I have garlic right now. It is getting closer to harvest time, although I would still expect not to harvest it until maybe mid to late June. And what I'll be looking for is for a lot of the leaves to turn brown and die back to show me that it is ready to harvest. This variety of garlic that I grow gets pretty big. It is called Dixon Softneck from the Experimental Farm Network. But last year and this year when I've grown it, I've noticed these little baby leaves growing out. And after harvesting the garlic last year and looking at it, these actually correspond to little baby cloves kind of in between the much larger cloves that you would see represented by these larger leaves. And I think that's really interesting. So at the first part of this trellis is tomatillos, and this one in particular is kind of struggling. You can see it kind of fell over, and the stem has tried to repair itself, but it's not looking great. Although the plant seems to still be getting some nutrients, I'm not entirely sure if this is going to survive, but we will see. Next to it you can see this little basil that I transplanted out that got eaten down to basically sticks. But if you look close, you can see right here is making new leaves right in the little armpits of where these older leaves used to be. So maybe it's going to recover. We'll see. I did put a few seeds in here just to help it out. But I've been struggling to keep the surface damp enough with all of this bright hot sun. The entire rest of the row is tomatoes and other random basil plants. I've got about 5 different types of tomatoes, and they're all indeterminate, with the plan being to prune them back to single stems all the way up along here. If I wasn't pruning these tomatoes, I would have planted them way too close together, but with some aggressive pruning, this is about as close as I would probably ever plant tomatoes. If you're interested in how I prune my tomatoes, I do have a video about that up here. In the second row here, we've got a few more interesting and various things going on. A ton of my onions have started flowering. And while I was expecting to see a lot of flowers, because I did plant some onions that were from last year that had, started sprouting and weren't really going to be edible. That's what this is. This group of onions is from a single onion that split and then started flowering. Onions are biennial, meaning they have a 2-year cycle, and you really expect to see them flower in their second year. Meanwhile, some of the starts that I planted are flowering as well, and that is less expected and also less ideal. This onion is still edible, but because of this flower stalk going through the middle, it's not going to be storable in the way you would think of drying and storing onions. So I'm just going to have to use a lot of my onions quicker. I've got a row of radishes here that I've been pulling from, but will probably stop because they are going to seed, and that's going to make the taste kind of bitter. But I'll probably leave a couple of them to go to seed, just because a flowering brassica is a lot of good flowers for the bees. It's supposed to help ward off pests, but I haven't really done much research or testing into that. If I have the space, I might as well let it just in case. And they do make, radishes in particular, they do make seed pods that are edible. So this can be a harvest for me, even if it's not the radish root itself. I have a really great video explaining all of that up here. Down past the radishes are potatoes. I've got a few different varieties in here. These are purple potatoes, which I am most excited about because they are kind of like magic color changing potatoes. They change color depending on the heat. When they are in the fridge, they get a little darker, and then you heat them back up and they turn this like lighter lavender color. It's really, really nice. So I've got a lot of those planted from seeds that I saved from last year. I'm also trying a new variety. This is Sarpomira over here. It's supposed to be blight resistant and also highly productive. So that would be really nice if that was true. I'm starting to see little flowers forming already, which is a good sign. Potatoes, the way you know when to harvest them is you wait for them to flower and then they die back, and then it's time to harvest your potatoes from underneath them. And the fact that they're already flowering, or starting to, means that we are not too far away from harvesting our potatoes. The onions in this area are also bulbing up really nicely. You can see this one here looking really good. This one is absolutely massive already. Just like look at that stalk. I'm almost tempted to leave this one in the ground, not harvest it, and let it go to seed next year, because it's one of the few that actually hasn't gone to seed. And if I can save the genetics that are not going to seed in this kind of hot, variable climate, that would be pretty ideal. Down here at the very end of the row, I wanted to show you something really weird. This should be an onion flower. You can kind of see the little flowers. But instead of having a nice round flower head, it looks almost like some of the seeds just like sprouted on the flower head. That's really wild. I've never seen anything like that before. Alright, the third row is the trellis row. Currently my trellises have peas on them, and these are starting to flower and make all these beautiful purple flowers, as well as the pea pods themselves are purple. I'll have to look around and find one for you guys. But on the outsides I also have more onions and garlic, and I actually had planted along here some noodle beans and cucumbers, but I have not seen them sprout. And this is actually the second time I've tried to plant cucumbers here and had them not sprout. So that's really, really weird to me, because stuff in this area usually has no trouble at all sprouting. And something like a noodle bean should only take like a couple of days to sprout. Now granted, it hasn't exactly been like height of summer temperatures, which would be really ideal for beans to sprout in like a day or two. I think, what was it? Last week, right before the last garden tour, it got down to 44 one night and 37 another night. So, that temperature can definitely delay the sprouting of stuff, and that could be what's going on. I didn't actually realize it was going to get that cold when I had planted this stuff, but I don't think that should have been cold enough to like kill the seeds or anything. So I think we're just going to have to wait and see, and if they don't come up in another week or so, I'll probably just plant more, and they might have more luck considering it's going to be a lot hotter going forward. somehow mixed in with all of my purple seeds, there is a pea that is making white flowers. That's either me putting the seed in the wrong spot or some weird genetic mutation, but it's probably me putting the seed in the wrong spot. And this is making regular green pods, whereas if I come around here, you can see these are the purple pods that I've been expecting from these purple pink flowers. Aren't those beautiful? If you haven't been here for very long, you're going to find out very quickly. I like to grow purple things. If it comes in purple, I'm probably growing it. Maybe someday when I have space, I will dedicate an entire section of garden to just purple themed versions of everything. That would be really cool. And then back past the trellises, I've got 2 big rows of fava beans, a couple of volunteer sunflowers, and I planted out a bunch of my little hot pepper starts. These are kind of smaller than I would have hoped putting them out, but none of them have died. They all look good. Nothing's been chewing on them. So pretty happy with that. This one in particular, this is a fish pepper. I put it here at the edge so that I would be able to see its beautiful foliage. It is variegated leaves, and the peppers end up looking a little variegated as well. So very excited to see that come up, and all the rest of these, which will be making really gorgeous jewel-like fruits. Looking at the fava beans, we've definitely got flowers coming on. And some of these near the bottom, these black crispy things, I think these are pollinated flowers that are setting fruit. So I think next week I'll have a bunch of baby beans to show you. As I was saying at the top of the video, I like to look at why things happen, but I also am like a fan of letting unusual things kind of go in the garden just to see what happens and make some conclusions about why we do things a certain way. So this potato came up from a potato that probably didn't get dug up the last time I had potatoes here, and it is planted way too close to these fava beans. But since I'm not like depending on this garden for sustenance, I was like, well, I'll let it grow and I'll see what happens. And I think what we're going to see is a good illustration of why you don't want to plant 2 things super close together. But honestly, they're not looking as bad as I had expected. This is a little chewed on, but otherwise very happy. And this is also a little chewed on, but also otherwise pretty happy looking. It doesn't seem to be too much smaller than its buddies. Doesn't seem to be putting on less flowers than its buddies. So yeah, I'll keep updating you guys on the weird things like this in the garden. This last row has even more onions. A few basil starts, a lot of lettuce, and down at the end I planted some more pepper starts. We also have more volunteer sunflowers. I have more volunteer sunflowers this year than I think I had intentionally planted sunflowers last year, which is interesting to me. And I have no idea what kind they are because I planted quite a wide variety of sunflowers in the past, so we'll see. Could also be sunflower seeds that came from my bird feeder. I have, the birds are tracking them everywhere, and I have to mow them down in the lawn sometimes, so could be something like that. I've got in here kales, lettuces, and I wanted to talk to you guys about some of these lettuces going to seed. You see how this one got really tall? That's a really good indication that anything is going to seed when it suddenly gets really tall, when like earlier it was kind of small and bushy. You can see this one's kind of doing it too. These other ones are just starting to. If I get down here, you can kind of see they're starting to reach up. As opposed to something like this, which is very clearly still staying small and short and bushy. This variety is Marvel of 4 Seasons, and it's supposed to be really resistant to heat and cold and things like that, you know, as according to the name, Marvel of 4 Seasons. So I can say that it is so far living up to its name and being the last one to go to seed. These other varieties, this is black-seeded Simpson, I've got Merlot, and this one is Outrageous lettuce. And all of them have been really good producers. I did intentionally plant lettuce in the shade because the heat here, it gets hot really fast, and lettuce will go to seed like that when it warms up. So the shade, I was hoping would keep it a little cooler and kind of stretch out the time that I was going to be able to harvest from it. But if we go look back over here in the second row, I've got 3 different lettuces here. This is actually a different variety. I cannot remember. Maybe it's a butter lettuce. But this one and the Merlot and the Marvel of Four Seasons here, none of them are showing any signs of going to seed, and they have been in way more sun. So that's really interesting to look at. And either something else is going on, or I'm wrong about the shade helping them not go to seed. Okay, so back to this last row. I've got sweet peppers planted in here, just kind of along this inner side towards the path. Onions back here, and then along this back between the weeds and the onions, I have sweet potato starts. You can kind of see this one right here. I put the sweet potatoes back here specifically because one, I don't care that much about getting sweet potatoes, so if they get choked out, it's not that big of a deal. And two, they don't really need a lot of maintenance, and they do actually kind of need a lot of space to vine. So I'm hoping that they kind of vine into the weedy section, and you know, I'm not gonna have to touch them until it's time to harvest them. So having them be in this like slightly harder to reach spot is kind of intentional. On the other side of these weeds is my swale, which is really a ditch that I dug to keep the water that's coming down this hill from rushing across the garden and washing things away. And I've left these weeds here to kind of help hold the soil in place, because if I just kept it bare and mulched, it wouldn't be nearly as sturdy as with all of these roots dug into it, kind of holding it down. And the roots are going to drink up the water that gets stuck in the swale, which is going to be really good for them, and also really good for kind of helping keep that swale from having standing water in it or overflowing or things like that. As we get closer to the end of the row down here, I've got this Brussels sprout going to seed. You can see pretty clearly that I am getting seed pods. That's what this is right here. It's starting to bubble up with little seeds in there. I probably will save seeds from this and try and plant them to have Brussels sprouts again this next fall. Lastly, I want to talk about this pathway. If you've been here before, you know I planted wine cap mushrooms here, and I recently put straw over the wood chips that I had here to kind of help them continue fruiting, and that really does seem to be working. Every time it rains, I get more, and honestly, there's so many of them coming up everywhere that I often miss them, like this one. There's a lot that have gotten to release their spores and hopefully maintain the population. This one probably isn't even that good for drying because it's feeling a little mushed and rotted. But there's so many of these mushrooms that I've been seeing around. Every time it rains, I have to remember to come out and look. I've still got quite a few pepper starts, and I haven't even started planting my eggplant starts. These will go in mostly in that second row once I decide to pull out all of those radishes. But the garden is looking very full, and definitely no more room to put in more things without taking out some things, which is always a little hard. But with the heat coming and looking at the weather, a lot of these things, especially like the radishes, they're going to seed. The lettuce is going to seed, and it's time to kind of switch things over. I used to feel like I had to extract like all of the production time out of something, like, oh, it's starting to go to seed, but like I can wait another week, and the week that I would have a head start on having a start in the ground and actually reaching its roots out is worth more than the little extra bit of harvest I'm going to get from this plant that is still struggling to survive as the weather is changing, which was a hard lesson to learn. But I think in the end it is more efficient use of space to go ahead and just take it out once it's starting to struggle. A little check-in on our volunteer squash here in the path. It's definitely a bushing type. Well, I don't know. It could be a vining type, to be honest. Still hard to say. Actually, maybe it is kind of looking more like a vining type. I have no idea what it is, but it wants to be here, so I'm going to let it try. All right, let's take a look at the raised beds. Immediately you notice these beautiful white flowers from the cilantro, aka coriander, but also lavender is starting to flower, and they're so pretty, they smell so good. I'm very excited to have some fresh lavender tea from this. My sage over here is still taking forever to flower. It is like the slowest thing I've ever seen. But it is making progress on opening these flowers. So eventually I will get to show you guys what a flowering sage looks like. I haven't looked it up. I have no idea. The thyme is still flowering, still looking amazing. And I have not yet cut it back from the Mexican tarragon coming back here. I just keep kind of scooching it. But yeah, this probably should get kind of cut back a fair bit to make room for this one coming back. And I still don't have a new stevia start to put in here, but hopefully I will soon. Carrots here, doing great. This is honestly pretty easy compared to all the failures I've had trying to grow carrots in ground in the garden, which is very interesting. Catnip, the cat's been sitting in it, but it is recovering. I've got licorice mint here doing quite well, and my peppermint also doing quite well in here. In the second raised bed, it is slowly filling out. I've got chamomile here that does look a little unhappy, to be honest, but it could probably use a little bit more water. The parsley that got eaten is coming back, which is good news. This kale is finally filling out. I've been pulling from it for salads. Chives just existing here. And then I put in some nasturtium starts, which did shock a little bit, but are putting on new beautiful leaves, and I'm really excited for them to be like big and spilling out the sides of the top here. In addition to the Italian oregano in the other bed, I am growing Greek oregano down here. If any of you have experience cooking with both, I'd really love to hear about when you decide which one to use. They definitely have different smells to them, and I assume the flavors are a little bit different as well. But, you know, I'd like to hear from people who have actual experience with them so that I can kind of inform how I use them in my cooking. Most of the harvesting in the garden, though, has been coming from the berry patch recently. The strawberries are going wild. I feel like every day I come by and there's just more ripe strawberries to pick. You can see this one here. It's not doing great on the underside. But lots of strawberries, and I just noticed that they are starting to put out runners again this year. So this will start expanding even more. I'm hoping to have it be ground cover for the entire berry patch. And while harvesting strawberries from the ground is not as convenient as harvesting them from like a vertical garden where the strawberries will hang out, I am really intentionally using this as ground cover, so it does kind of need to be on the ground. The blackberries have been putting on a ton of fruit. I haven't seen any go ripe yet, but I think we're getting pretty close. Maybe next week or the week after, these will be full of ripe blackberries, which is super exciting. And I started noticing ripe raspberries on these bushes. Let's see, over here, there's a few ripe berries right under there, and there's a few back here. Oh my goodness, and there's some here. Yeah, it's starting to be raspberry season. Oh, and we've got a little stink bug on that one. Hello. So I've actually had so many strawberries that I made a small batch of jam the other day. I made about 3 of those jars that are like this size. I forget what measurement that is. But they're tall and they're regular mouth size. And I had 3 of those, and I could probably, with like another 2 weeks of picking strawberries, make another batch about that size. Very exciting. The strawberry jam, I tried a little bit of it. It is so good. So good. And before I go, I did want to talk about these logs over here. You might have seen the video where I inoculated them, and just talk about the expectations that I have for these. I got this spawn as a gift from a friend of a friend who didn't know what to do with it and thought I might like it. And so I inoculated these logs, and they're gonna take a while to colonize, like 6-8 months, maybe a year. These are pretty big. And shiitakes are generally going to fruit when it's a little warmer, unless you have a variety that specifically fruits in the cold. And so I would expect these to colonize, even if they colonize as fast as 6 months from now, maybe to not fruit until the next warm season comes around. So this is like a long-term thing. I'm not expecting to really see any activity here for at least a year. Something interesting I learned is that you can expect about a year of fruiting for each inch of diameter of your log. So I'm thinking this is like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of fruiting. That would be really cool if that was true. So since there are a lot of new people, I did want to let you guys know that I do have a Patreon that you can join. There are exclusive stickers that you can get. There is a Discord community that you can join where I'm always in there sharing pictures of my garden, looking at the pictures of other people's gardens, kind of solving problems as they come up for people, things like that. And I do a monthly live stream where you can come on and actually chat with me with your real voice if you want, where you can leave text comments and just like chat about how things are going in the garden. So if you're interested in learning more about all of that, I'll have the link to my Patreon below. It is below every video, so if you forget and think about it later, just check the description of whatever video you happen to be watching. Alrighty guys, thank you so much for watching. If you want to catch up on any garden tours you might have missed, I'll leave a playlist up here. And until next time, I wish you all happy gardening.